Hello everyone and welcome to Park to Table, where we help you create your favorite theme park dishes right at home. Today we're here at Epcot's Festival of the Arts. It is the shortest festival that Epcot holds, so that means there's not a lot of time to get out and enjoy all the delicious food. So we're gonna go inside today and pick a couple dishes that we can recreate at home so you can enjoy part of the festival in your own home. So let's go inside and check out a couple dishes that we can take back home and recreate. Today, the dishes we're going to be recreating are from El Artista Hambriento, which is near the Mexico Pavilion in Epcot. It's part of the Festival of the Arts menu. The first dish is the Carne Asada, which is chipotle marinated beef sirloin, sweet potato puree, and crispy fried onions. So the first thing we got to get into is this Carne Asada. Okay, the steak is really good. It's really tender, and it's got an excellent char on the outside, so that's something to note. You really want to get that caramelized outside and still retain the tenderness. I think the marinade is going to be key there, so we can really get that caramelization on the outside of the steak. Let's give these yams a try here. Those are good. They're not overly seasoned. The flavor and the sweetness of the sweet potato really do come through in that dish. So that should be pretty easy to recreate. The key there is to not over season, because you don't want it to overpower the marinade on that delicious steak. And then we've got these crispy fried onions here, which they've got a little bit of texture to them. And those are good too. They're really, really cooked down, really caramelized, and then they've almost got like kind of a cornmeal or masa texture to them. So it'll be interesting to try to recreate those as well. Our next dish is the flan de coco. It's a coconut flan with guava sauce and whipped cream. So we'll take a bite of this, make sure to get some of that guava sauce off the bottom. That's really good too. I feel like that flan has more of a texture than most flans do have, and I think because it has a lot of coconut inside the flan, it's almost more of like a mousse, so we'll be able to recreate that also. And then this guava sauce on the bottom is not overly sweet, but does have a lot of guava flavor. So we'll have to get some guava paste and make a sauce to complement our flan. Okay, so let's break down these flavors a little bit more. Typically when you hear something is chipotle marinated, you expect it to be spicy. That steak was not spicy. It had a really good marinade and char on it, but it wasn't spicy at all. So that's something to keep in mind when you're cooking with chipotle, or you can get the canned chipotles in adobo. That sauce a little bit can go a very long way, so we're gonna have to tame that down, probably with some like soy sauce, Worcestershire sauce, maybe some lime juice, and a couple other Mexican seasonings in there to get a nice crust on the outside of that steak. Again, the yams were really good, but very simple, which is a nice complement to a steak like that. When you have something that's really marinated and char heavy, you've got a lot of flavor on that steak, so you don't need a lot coming from the yams. It's just there as a texture complement and to add a little bit of sweetness to the dish. And then those fried onions were more texture also, and those are going to be a little bit tricky just because of the texture that was on them. Like I said, I think they were fried with like a little cornmeal or something like that, so we're going to have to figure out how to recreate that texture. So let's head on back to the kitchen and get to work on these dishes. Okay, so we are back at home, so let's think about what we need to do. First of all, we should start the flan, because the flan's going to take a little while to bake, and then it's going to take a little while to cool down. So we want to go ahead and get the flan in the oven. That way we can get our steak marinating and everything while the flan is cooking and cooling. So let's go ahead and get started on the flan. The first thing we're going to do is make a caramel to go in the bottom of the pans. I'm going to use like 4 little individual ramekins to make our flan. So they're little individual portions instead of a traditional flan, is more like in a pie dish. But I like the way that it was served and presented at the Festival of the Arts, so we're going to try to recreate that as closely as possible. So to make the caramel, we're going to mix a half a cup of sugar and a 1/4 cup of water in a saucepan and put it on medium-high heat. And as soon as the sugar is dissolved, you don't want to stir the mixture anymore. You just want to let it come to a boil by itself. You can give the pan a slight shake every now and then. Get a wet pastry brush and brush down the sides of the pan, but you don't want to stir the sugar mixture itself, because if you introduce any crystals, then you'll get crystallization in the caramel and you won't get that smooth, silky caramel texture. So as soon as that comes to a kind of a medium amber color, you're going to want to take that off the heat. Caramel is one of those things that can go from beautiful and delicious to absolutely burned in nanoseconds. So be sure to keep an eye on that, and we'll get that into our dishes. So we'll just carefully pour the caramel in each of these dishes. Try to get a nice coating on each of the bottom of them, and be careful with it because melted sugar is very, very dangerous and can burn you very badly. It looks like we got a nice golden color on that, so we're just going to let those set up for just a few minutes while we mix the rest of the ingredients for our flan. Okay, so now that our caramel is set up in our dishes, we're going to start making the base for the flan. So I've got a little mixing cup here, and what we're going to use is 2 eggs. And this is a little bit of a smaller recipe. You can double this and make 8 servings. I'm just doing 4 because we don't need a whole lot. I just want to kind of recreate the individual portions that we have at Festival of the Arts. But if you are looking to entertain a large party, then certainly you can double this recipe. To our 2 eggs, we're going to add 1/3 cup of milk and 7 ounces of sweetened condensed milk. And I'm just going to eyeball it. It's about half a can. Perfect. And about 7 ounces of coconut milk. When you get coconut milk, the solids will oftentimes solidify on the top, so just be sure to stir it thoroughly before you use it. That way you get all that nice coconut texture and flavor in there. So we'll use about half a can of this also. It's about 7 ounces. Good. And then the unique thing about the flan at Festival of the Arts was that it had coconut inside the flan. A lot of times flans are just really creamy and smooth, but we're going to add some shredded coconut to this. But first, what I want to do is blend this up. So I've got an immersion blender, and this is a really useful tool for really getting everything super nice and mixed up. So we're just going to give this a quick blend. And then what we're going to do is I've got a really fine mesh strainer here. We're going to strain this out, so any solids that are left over get strained out, and then we'll go back and add the coconut to it. So let's get this strained, and then we'll mix in the coconut and pour it into our dishes. And once you strain this, what you'll be left with is just a really, really smooth, delicious custard base for your flan. Wonderful. All right, now let's go ahead and mix this coconut back in there. We'll get these poured in right on top of our caramel that we made, and we're only going to fill these up about 3/4 of the way. We want to leave a little bit of room. It's not going to rise much, but we don't want them all the way to the top. In fact, it won't rise at all. And we'll just pour this gently over the caramel that we have in there. The caramel should be set up, so there's no real worry about mixing it in. But you still want to be a little bit careful. To cook these flan, we're going to use the water bath method. So we've got a roasting dish here. We're going to stick these ramekins into the roasting dish, and we'll put hot water in the roasting dish until the water hits about halfway up our ramekins. And then we'll stick this in a 325-degree oven for about 30 minutes. These are a little bit on the smaller side, so I don't think they're going to take as long as if you were going to bake a full-size flan like in a pie dish. So we'll check them after about 30 minutes. They should be set but still a little bit wiggly, so you can have that nice custard texture. So we'll get the hot water in here and then we'll put it in our oven, and we'll check them in a little bit. Okay, so our flan is in the oven. So next up, let's get started on our sirloin dish. The dish at Epcot had a really good crust on it, so we want to try to recreate that. And the flavors of the steak were definitely the dominant flavors. We do have a sweet potato here for our base, and then as our steak is marinating, we'll work on those fried onions. So let's get started on the marinade first. So I've got here some crushed pineapple. This may seem a little bit weird, but pineapple is a natural meat tenderizer, and it's going to give us that acidic flavor that we found in the marinade on the steak. So we'll put that in our bowl. Next up is the chipotle peppers. These are just canned chipotle peppers in adobo sauce. This sauce is something that a little goes a very long way, and it's very spicy. So I'm just going to use maybe half a teaspoon in this. We have 4 smaller sirloin steaks here, so I don't want to overpower those steaks with this adobo sauce. I'm gonna add about half a teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce, some minced garlic. You could certainly use fresh, but this canned stuff makes it easy. And then a little salt and a little fresh pepper. And then I always, in my marinades, like to use a little bit of oil. You can use vegetable oil. Here I've got some olive oil. It just kind of helps spread the marinade out and make sure that they all get coated. And I'm only using about a half a teaspoon of that as well. So we'll get this all mixed up. And then I'm just gonna put these steaks in just like a baking dish here, just so I can make sure that marinade is all spread around evenly. You want to make sure these are coated on both sides, and then let them marinate for at least 30 minutes. You can do it for up to a couple of hours, but that's going to give, at least 30 minutes is going to give that pineapple a chance to really get in and marinate and tenderize some of that meat. So we'll give these a little bit of time to marinate, and we'll get started on our fried onions. We've got our steaks marinating, so we'll start on these fried onions here. The interesting thing about the onions at Epcot were that they had a little bit of cornmeal on them. So we're gonna try to recreate that here. But first what we wanna do is take our onions. I've got like about a half of a yellow onion here, really thinly sliced. And we're actually gonna stick these in some buttermilk for about 15 minutes. And that'll give us some time to let our oil come up to temperature. The reason you put these in buttermilk is it kind of takes some of that sulfuric taste and smell out of the onions and gets them nice and tender, and it gives something for the dredge to stick to. So we're going to create our dredge here as soon as we get these onions in the buttermilk. Good. And for the dredge, very simple. We're just going to use a cup of regular all-purpose flour and a quarter cup of yellow cornmeal, and then a little bit of fresh cracked pepper, and a little salt. We'll just give that a little mix also, make sure everything's nice and combined. And I have about 2 to 3 cups of vegetable oil on the stove coming to temperature. You want it to get up to around 400 degrees to give you a nice crispy coating on there. So we'll let these onions sit in this buttermilk while our oil comes up to temperature, and as soon as our oil is ready, we'll give them a dredge and pop them right in the fryer. Okay, so our oil is getting close to 350, which is a good time to start working on prepping these onions and getting them in the dredge. So I'm going to take my strainer here, and I'm just going to strain off the extra liquid from the onions. I'm going to try to get a lot of this off because that's where that onion flavor went, is into that buttermilk. So we'll get a lot of that off, and then we will put the onions into the flour mixture. and just give them a nice toss. And make sure to separate them so they get fully coated on all the sides, and you don't get big clumps of onions also. That feels good. So let's walk these over to our oil and fry them up. Just look at how beautifully these fried up. They're perfect golden brown, nice and crispy, thin little pieces of fried onion. And they're so good. They're gonna go perfectly on our steak. Our flan is just about done, so we'll keep an eye on that, pull that out of the oven, and then we'll work on the rest of our steak. While our flan is finishing, and our steak is still marinating, we can go ahead and get our sweet potato. This is gonna be the simplest part of the dish. I didn't really detect a whole lot of flavor to the sweet potato, and they don't need a lot, honestly. They're delicious on their own. So we're just gonna make a simple mashed sweet potato. So I just have one small sweet potato here. So we'll just give that a peel, and we'll chop it up. And then we're just gonna boil it until it's soft, just like making mashed potatoes. And as soon as our steak is done, we'll have everything else ready to go. You can just rough chop this sweet potato. The important part is to make sure that all the pieces are about the same size so they cook evenly. And it should take 7 or 8 minutes.
A few moments later.
So our flan is out of the oven and they're set, but they still have a little bit of wiggle to them. I don't know how much you can see it there, but we give the pan a little bit of a shake and they move a little bit, but not too much. So we'll let those cool down for about 10 or 15 minutes and then we'll stick them in the fridge to cool down completely. Okay, we're ready to prepare our steaks. There's a couple of ways you could do this. Obviously, the grill is probably everybody's first choice, and that will give you that nice, crispy, texture on the outside. Today, what I'm going to do, though, is a little bit different. I'm going to broil them. You could certainly pan-sear them as well if you wanted to do that, but I think broiling them is going to give us a nice combination of that crispy outside texture without overcooking them, because I feel like if you put a steak this size on a grill, it's gonna overcook almost immediately. So I like a nice medium on a cut like this. If it's a little bit thicker, I'll go for a medium rare. So we're aiming for medium on these. What I want to do is take these out and just pick off any of the larger pieces of pineapple or anything else that's on there, because you really just want the steak itself. The pineapple's got a lot of sugar in it. It's gonna burn if we put it under the broiler for too long. So I just want to clean these up a little bit before we stick them in there. I've got the broiler on high, but I have my rack on the middle. That way, and especially because this pan is a little bit higher, it's gonna elevate them a little bit. You wanna use a pan like this that has a rack where the steaks can kind of sit up. That way they're not sitting flat on a surface and collecting those juices, because that'll prevent the outside from really getting nice and that nice texture on the outside too. So we'll stick these in the broiler for 5 to 6 minutes per side, and then we'll let them rest for another 5 to 6 minutes, and that should give us a nice medium on these steaks. And while we have our steaks and our sweet potatoes going, we need to make the guava sauce for our flan. So I've just got some canned guava, or some jarred guava preserves here, and this is really simple also. There's not a lot necessary for this. We're just gonna we're just gonna take about maybe a quarter cup of this guava jelly here, and then we're just gonna thin it down with a little bit of water. A couple tablespoons will probably be enough, but you really just wanna give it a nice mix. You're not looking for anything in particular here, except for just like a nice thin spreadable mixture that we can put underneath that flan to really give us, that recreation of the dish at Epcot. So what I have here is the texture is a little bit thinner than applesauce, but it's really a personal preference. Once you kind of get to the texture you want, you can either add more jelly or more water or whatever you're looking for, but really just a personal preference there. And that's perfect. That's all you need. Okay, our steaks are done. We'll just let them rest for a few minutes just to kind of loosen up and redistribute those juices. We'll grab our sweet potatoes off of the stove, quickly drain those, and then we'll get to work on assembling the plate. So with the sweet potatoes, again, you don't really want to do too much to them. I'm just going to go back after I've drained them with my immersion blender here. I really like the way that this incorporates air and makes them like nice and fluffy, so we'll just give these a quick mash. We'll just take a scoop of these mashed potatoes, these mashed sweet potatoes, put them down on the plate there. Beautiful. Grab one of our steaks, and you want to cut this pretty thinly across the grain. Cutting across the grain keeps the muscle fibers nice and short and tender. And we'll plate this up. Top it with some of our homemade fried onions. And there you go. Recreation of the dish from El Artista Hambriento at Epcot's Festival of the Arts. Now we'll give it a taste and see how it is. Of course, we gotta start with the steak, right? Really good. Every bit as flavorful as the steak that we got in Epcot. I really think that I would prefer more of the chipotle in there because I really do like spicy food, and I think that's kind of a hallmark of a lot of Mexican food is those spicy pepper flavors. We'll try the potatoes here. Good. Again, very simple, very plain. And then of course with the fried onions, just tying everything together. It's delicious. Things I would do differently on this dish. I think if I were cooking for a large family or just wanting like a dinner-sized portion, I would definitely go with a different cut of meat. I think the sirloin is fine, but I think this dish would be excellent with like a flank steak or a hanger steak or a skirt steak, especially if you did grill it so you get those nice char marks on there. It would be really delicious, but I think we actually did a really close representation here of the dish from Epcot. Now, let's plate up our flan and see how close we got there. Of course, the moment of truth for any flan is the flip, right? So we're gonna take our knife, go around the outside of the dish here. Hope that caramel releases from the bottom. Give it a little shake. Oh, beautiful. Look at that. We'll put a little bit of this guava sauce just around the outside there. Very nice. I mean, it looks delicious. Let's try it. That is fantastic. The texture is perfect. I actually think I prefer the texture on this one than I do the one at Epcot. The one at Epcot was almost a little cakey. Kind of threw me off guard a little bit because flans are supposed to be super creamy and rich. This guava sauce on there is fantastic and very simple also. Don't need a lot there. And I love the coconut that goes throughout the flan. I think that adds a really nice texture balance and contrast to it. That's delicious. Well, I think we did a pretty good job today recreating these two dishes from Epcot's Festival of the Arts. I'll put the full recipes in the description below. If you make these, please let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts and see how it went for you. Throw me a picture at Instagram. I'm at Native Tourist Media. And be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't. And if you want to see more of this, let me know in the comments what dish you'd like to recreate next. And we'll see you on the next one. Bye.